Hi guys, today we'll be taking another look at arrays, except this time we'll take a much deeper dive into some of the framework functions that are available to help make your life easier. So let's have a look. We're going to create a new project, console app, .NET Framework, C#. We will call this one lists part 2. And we will create having to think about it then. And so there's quite a lot to get through today, because even though we only very briefly covered lists in the previous video, there is a huge amount of functions available on the list object. So today we will be covering some of the most common interactions you'll have with the lists in your programs. So we want to take a look at creating a list of integers this time. We did strings last time. We want to add some numbers to the list. We want to count the number of items we have in our list. We will be checking if the list contains a specific number. We'll be adding all of the numbers in a list together, so summing them like you would in Excel. We will get the average value for the numbers in the list. We will add a number at the beginning of the list, and we'll add a number at the end of the list. We will find the highest number in the list, and we will find the lowest number in the list. And we will select the first number and the last number from the list. Finally, we will create a loop and loop over the list like we did last time. And then whilst in the loop, we will look at a function which lets you find the current position of the currently looping item. So let's start by sending a message to the user. So we say console.write line, and we will say, welcome to the numbers, to the list of numbers program. And we will create our list of integers. So we'll say var list equals new list. And this time we want integers in our sharp brackets rather than strings. So we'll put int, and there we go, we've created our list. So this is the same syntax we looked at last time. The only difference being is we're now putting int in instead of string. What we didn't look at last time is how you can actually instantiate your list with some values so that you already have something in the list instantly as you declare it. And the way we do this is we actually put in our squiggly brackets, and then we can just put a comma separated list of strings in here. So we could say, oh, actually saying that, we don't want to put strings in here because this is an int array. So let's put some random numbers in here. So 99, 21, 55, and 2020. So the syntax is pretty easy. You can, as we did before, just add your double parentheses as part of your new instantiation of a list, and then just before you terminate the line with a semicolon, just bring in your squiggly brackets and then pop some values in between commas, and then your list will start with those items in it. So that's one way you can create a list with items in it, but let's actually add some numbers in as well like we did before. So we'll say list.add, and we'll add in 102, and we'll do list.add 500. We'll do one more, list.add 999. So we've added some numbers. As before, you just use the add command, the add function, and we just pass in a number, and that pops it into the list. When you use the add command, it actually adds that value at the end of the list. So that's something to watch out for. Another thing we can do with lists and arrays is we can count the items. So we could say var count of list, we'll call it, and we'll set that to list.count. And if we hover over list.count, you'll see that it actually gets the number of elements contained in the list. So this will store a variable for us with, well, let's count them. How many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that would equal 7 because there's 7 items in the list. We can also check using conditional logic whether a list contains a specific number. So we could say if list.contains, so we're using the contains function, and then we can pass in a number here. So let's give it one that we know is in there, 999. And we could say equals true. Then we can run this block of code. So this is very similar to the conditional logic we did in a previous video. The only difference is we're now checking to see if this contains function returns true. If it does return true, then the code inside of our conditional statement here will run. So let's just tell the user, we'll say console.writeLine the list contains 999. Put a smiley face in there. And actually for our little count method here as well, let's just output that into the console too. So we'll say console.writeLine. We'll say there, or we'll put total items in the list is, and we'll just add our count on there. So count of list that we made earlier. And we'll just pull out those typos. Total items in the list is, so then the console will output how many items are in the list. And then let's have a look at what we've got next. So we want to add all of the numbers in the list together. So this one's really cool actually. So we can just say var total, so we'll create a new variable called total equals, and we'll say list.sum. And the sum function, if we hover over it, computes the sum of a sequence of integer values. So this sum one isn't actually available on, say if this was a list of string, you wouldn't be to add the strings together. So there's no sum function there, but this one is specifically for integers, and you can add them together and we can set them into our total variable. So let's just output that to the user as well. So console.writeLine the total sum of all items is, and we'll just add that onto the end, total. And as well as doing sum, we also have a function for getting the average. So we can say var average equals list.average, and that will give us the average value. And just like before, we will output that to the user. We'll say the average of all items is average. Next, we'll look at adding a number to the start. So remember before when we added these up here, and I mentioned that actually this always adds to the beginning, to the end. If you want to put a number at the start of the list, you can actually do that. So you can say list.insert, and then you can specify the index. So the first index in an array is actually 0, it's not 1. So if we wanted to put something at the beginning of the list, we would specify the index as 0, because that's the very first index, and then we'll specify a number. So we'll put in 777, and we'll return that line. And adding something to the end of a list is obviously very easy. We've looked at that. We can just click list.add. So we'll just, for the sake of completeness, we will add an item to the end of the array. We'll say 1, 2, 3. Something else we can do is we can find out what the highest number in the list is. So we could say var highest equals list.max. That's the maximum value. So if we hover over that, you see it returns the maximum value in a sequence of int values. So we've got a list here, which is a sequence of int values, so we can pull out the max. And we can output that to the user. Let's say the biggest number is, let's say highest. And equally, we also have one that does lowest. So we could say var lowest equals list.min. And we can upload that to the user. And we'll say lowest number is plus lowest. And then what we can also do is we can actually select a specific item from a list. We can pick the first one, we can pick the last one, we can also pick them based on index. So we could say var first item equals list.first, and that would get us the first item. However, we could also do a slightly different syntax. So because we already know that the first item will be 0, we can actually use these square brackets and we can put in 0. And that essentially does exactly the same thing. So we've got list square bracket 0 will be the first item in the list, or we could do list.first. And those two pieces of code are exactly the same. So it's up to you. We can also select the last item in the list. So we could say var last item equals list.last. And that will give us the final item in the list. So now what we're going to do is we're going to loop over all of the items in our list using a for each loop. So we say for each var item in list. So that's our list. We want to run this block of code for every single item in this list. And I'll just drag my comment up here so we have it in the right place. So one thing that you can do whilst you're inside a loop, you might want to know how far through the loop you are. So if we know that, say, our list has got, maybe 6 or 7 values in it now, and the loop will run, and we'll get the first one, and then we'll get the second one, and then we'll get the third one, and it'll loop all the way through until there isn't any more, and then it will jump out of this line of code. And what we can do whilst we're inside the scope of our loop is we can actually find out the index from the array. So we could say var current loop index equals, and then we'll speak to the list again. We'll say list dot index of, and then we can just pass in our item. So just copy and paste item in there. And then we will get an integer that represents where we currently are in the loop. So what we could do is we could just output that in the loop to the console. So we could say console.writeLine, and we could say currently on loop number, and then we'll just add our current loop index there, current loop index. And then as we loop through, we'll inform the user of whereabouts in the loop we currently are. And then finally, before we run the program, we will just do a console.readline to stop the console from closing. And then we'll just run through exactly what's going on here. So let's go. So you'll see we have our salutation at the top there, welcoming us to the program. By the time we reached this line, we had 7 items in the list. We checked to see if the list contained 999, and it did. So we got the 999 message. Then we actually made a mistake here. So we actually used console.write instead of .writeLine. So it's joined some of these lines together. So we know the total sum of all items is 3,796, and the average of all items is 542.28. The biggest number was 2020, and the lowest number is 21. And then we looped through the numbers at the bottom here. And as you can see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that 0 is important because arrays, they start at 0. So if an array has 3 items in it, then what you would see is it would have an item 0, an item 1, and an item 2. It can be quite confusing working with 0 indexed arrays when you first get started. So whenever you do a count, just know that if your count was 3, To get the last one, you'd actually be looking for the index of 2. So yeah, it's just a little weirdness to get your head around. When you get a count, it's like offset by 1, essentially. But that is it for working with lists of integers and doing all of this fancy sort of free code that .NET gives you to work on your arrays. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.